Tom Schwab, welcome to the Star Coach Show.
Meg, I am thrilled to be here.
I already love your energy. We did a pre-call. We immediately connected on this fact that business owners cannot be a success and a secret at the same time. It was with all the many things that you could talk about, we immediately zeroed in on the fact that we both are very passionate about that and that we need to help coaches be successful. So we're going to be talking about how can we use Chat GPT or other AI to actually be our best referral partner. And what's
Yes.
that all about? We're going to be diving into that, but let me share with everybody first a little bit about you. Because my audience knows that a lot of people try to get on the show, and I'm really particular about who I let get in front of them. And you are definitely somebody who has earned the time in front of my audience. Tom is the founder and CEO of Interview Valet. Interview Valet is actually a company that has sent me many wonderful guests for this show. We have Tom's company to thank for some of our real sterling guests. You're also a military veteran, so I thank you for your service in that. And you're an entrepreneur, you're an author, you are a pioneer in so many things. And through that varied path, you ended up in owning this interview marketing company. We're going to be talking about like how podcasts lined up with you, what's all that about. But one of the reasons why I want you to share that journey with us is I have yet to meet a coach who coaching is their very first career. Coaching tends to be one of those careers that we move into through many different phases of our lives. And you moved into your company through many different careers, many different phases. So that's how I love when people will share what their journey was. So as I mentioned, we're going to help reduce this whole concept of obscurity. We can't be obscure. We can't be a secret and a success. That's what our topic's going to be today. But let's start with what the heck is the journey that you walked to get to the place that you are now?
Well, Meg, it only makes sense in the rearview mirror. And I always say it's more evolutionary than revolutionary, right? We all start with this great idea. We know where it's going to go, and then life takes us other ways. So I got into the U.S. Naval Academy on a clerical error. So when people thank me for my service, I always thank them for paying for my education. I have no depth perception, and I shouldn't have been let in, but by the grace of God and a clerical error, I became a naval officer, ran nuclear power plants, and that taught me systems and processes. And when people say thank you for your service, I'm like, thank the families because it's really tough on them.
Yes,
I
it is.
realized that I did not want that, but I moved from the Navy over to corporate America, right? From one stable job to another. And as
Mhm.
I looked at that, it was like I felt like I was in a submarine when I went into corporate America. I was promoted very quickly from engineering to operations to distribution, but I wanted to get out in the world. And so
Ah,
I took a straight commission sales job and got to experience all of Michigan. I know where every orthopedic hospital in Michigan is. Um, and that gave me a chance to be more entrepreneurial. And I
mhm.
actually had the distributorship, and I thought, okay, now I'm an entrepreneur. Well, the truth was, I had one customer, right? One manufacturer. So when the economy turned in 2008, they wanted to buy all the distributorships back, right? Go direct to the consumer. Made sense
Ah,
for them, and they did right by me. But I had this little sideline business, and I knew I was doing good with it, right? I was helping people, but I didn't know if I could scale it. And obscurity right here in Michigan. So I'd read a book by two smart guys from MIT, Brian Halligan and Dharmesh Saw. They went on to form a company called HubSpot. And I read the book and I said, hey, I bet you this would work for e-commerce. And they said, nobody's tried it for that. Why don't you give it a try? I'm like, sure. So we were their first e-commerce case study, built that up from a regional player to a national leader. And then when I was in my sabbatical phase, about 2014, I was in a mastermind and a bunch of people said, how did you do it? And I'm like, well, a lot of guest blogging, but that doesn't work anymore. But I bet you that you could use podcast interviews just like we used to use guest blogs 20 years ago. So we tested it. It worked well. And Meg, I wrote a cheesy little PDF. I did a course that I never took out of beta because I wanted people to get results with it. And our early beta testers told us, I want to be the guest. You take care of all the rest. So we launched Interview Valet in early or late 2015. And for the first few years, it was people would say, what's a podcast? And then it really started to take off. And now we have a team of 22, all remote. We work with high level coaches, consultants, both B2B and B2G, a lot of nonfiction authors. And we help them get on targeted podcast interviews. I believe that obscurity is everyone's biggest problem today, right? There are thousands, tens of thousands of people that are praying for your solution. The only problem is they don't know you exist. And I think, people always say, we buy the best. No, we buy the best we know of. And I think I encourage people to get out there because we can't help people if they don't know about us.
Oh, so good. So within that, we'll talk about, since this is your business, sort of how does getting on podcasts help us get away from that obscurity? And we also really wanted to lean into, there's a lot of technology out there. This AI is booming. And how can we use that to help us create the kind of buzz, or, well, you're going to help us understand, what is it that does to potentially help us be not to be known, to get our message out there. So we want to kind of start with, the world isn't the same as it was. It certainly isn't the same as it was when I started as a therapist back in 1986, a long time. And it was, everything was face to face, and I worked in an agency in downtown Detroit, and so it was the yellow pages days, right? People would find their therapist through the yellow pages. Not anymore.
I would
So
I would
mhm.
say that the more things have changed, the more they've stayed the same too. So there's some overarching principles. One of them is that products are sold, services are bought. And that's a big difference. So when people say, well, you just build a funnel and, do a lead magnet and all the rest of that, that's for selling products, not for helping people buy services. The other thing you said, people go to the yellow pages way back when. And I think back then I'd go to the yellow pages as a last resort.
Oh,
Often I would ask other people, right?
right.
Who's a good mechanic? Who's a good therapist? Who's a good pediatrician? Whatever it was. So there's that referral network. And
Mhm.
I think that has been throughout all of time. And now we're starting to see it just in different ways. So people get the referrals from trusted advisors like a podcast host, like
Mhm.
friends. And it's interesting because even ChatGPT now has become a referral source. It's been interesting in 18 months, search engine traffic is just plummeting. And now that people can go to ChatGPT on their phone, they're using it as a search engine, right? Who is a coach that focuses on this? And you want to make sure that when they ask their friends, you come up in the conversation. And when they ask ChatGPT, it comes up in conversation. And the techniques to do that are largely the same, right? ChatGPT now is looking for two things. They're looking for sentiment, right? Do people talk positively about you or negatively about you? And then the other one is called share of voice. How much are people talking about you? How much are you talking about yourself? And so that's one of the things why podcast interviews can be so powerful, because it used to be we'd get on a podcast because we wanted to talk to our ideal clients, right? They're already listening to this podcast. The people that might refer us are listening to the podcast, right? I've always joked that I don't have any problems, but I know lots of people that do have problems, right? That old joke, I don't have a drinking problem, but I know lots of people at the bar that do. So that idea of when you hear something, often you'll think of, oh, Brian needs to hear this. So I might go ahead and forward that podcast interview onto him and say, I was listening to this, and minute 13 made me think of our discussion the other day. Well, perfect, right? That is a great way to get in front of ideal clients, right? You can use the content to repurpose it for social media so that when people are looking there, right, they're not just seeing a Facebook ad or an ad going to a funnel or a master class. They're looking for some real content. And then the amazing part that we have seen, especially here over the summer of 2024, is that ChatGPT and the large language models are starting to listen to podcasts, watch videos, and base the referrals on that. And so we've heard from clients, and we've even heard from our prospects that come to us, and we'll ask, you always ask, how did you find out about us? And they said, oh,
Right.
I just, they asked about podcast guesting, and you came up in Chat GPT, and it had great things to say about you. Oh, and as we looked at that common theme is, like you said, you've got to be out there. You've got to have that share of voice. You've got to have the sentiment. And for coaches, especially, telling the stories, being able to talk and let people either come towards you or not, right? People will say
Right.
magnetic marketing. Well, magnets attract the right thing and repel the wrong thing. And the thing is that, the better the marketing, the easier the sales. So that's really, the old time principles just just adopted to the technology we have today.
Love that. So let's imagine, I mean, so we've set the stage. I feel my audience saying, "Ooh, ooh, tell me more. How specifically would I do something? Like what would I need to do?" And you said share the voice. So can you give some specific examples if I wanted to get on GPT the chat radar,
Yep.
since my alphabet soup is not coming out of my mouth very well. If I want to get on its radar, what are some things that I can do and be intentional about that might help with that process?
Mhm. Like you said, you can't be a secret and a success. So what do you have to do so you're not a secret, right? So you need to be seen more. You need to be heard more. So look at opportunities to do that. And most people think, well, great. So if I'm on the radio, people will hear me. Well, only if they're listening to that radio station. Or if I'm speaking at this conference. Yeah, but if only if they go to the conference. So look
Mhm.
at avenues that are easy, that are scalable, and that are digital, right? So if it's a podcast interview, a webinar, a summit, all of those things are digital. So that the large language models are scanning those. And the other thing is then you can promote those. So you take all the little clips, the video
Mhm.
shorts, the reels, and you can put those up on social media. And in some ways, I think it like rain clouds, right? You can seed the rain clouds. It's the same thing. People are going to be talking about you, but you want to make sure you're out there proactively talking, because on a podcast interview, all of it is going to be a positive sentiment, right? All of it is going to be out there on not only your platform, but someone else's platform. So it's just a
Right.
great way. There's no nobility in being unknown. And I struggled with this, Meg, early on. It's like, oh, I don't want to be the face of the company, right? Well, somebody's got to be, right? And I'm not out there talking about myself. I'm talking about our clients, their success, but someone has to do that.
Right. Right. So one of the things that I want the audience to think about is, if you're thinking, well, it's only going to count if I'm on like Brene Brown's podcast, or if I'm on, whatever the biggest reigning podcast. That's actually not true. I mean, you're talking about, get your voice out there, get into the digital world, and that's going to give you something to share, and it's going to give something that's scanned, and so it doesn't have to be the top 1% of podcasts, basically, is what I'm
That's
thoughts about that.
That's correct. And one of our clients, and I learned so much from our clients, he always said, bigger is not better, better is better. So don't just go for, oh, I want to be on Joe Rogan. Well, would Joe Rogan's audience be interested in what you have to say? Right. I would be a lousy guest for that. It could be a great podcast on yoga. Right. I know myself. I can't talk yoga. I can't do yoga. So it might be a great podcast, but it would actually be negative for me. So always,
And the audience would be like, why is this person on this yoga podcast? I've tuned in for yoga, and I'm hearing about something that's not yoga.
and like you said, hosts are very protective of their audience. They only want somebody that can bring value. So start with that. What value could I bring? What is my ideal audience? And I struggled with this. And I think introverts do really well on podcast interviews, right? And because they're at times they're great communicators, they're good on one-on-one, they're
Mhm.
more comfortable in their environment, but also sometimes they don't have huge egos and they're like, well, like I was, what would I be an expert on? I'm not the expert. And a friend of mine who's a lawyer helped me with this. He said, you may not be the expert, but you are an expert. And he said, the legal definition of an expert is someone, because of their training, their experience, their life, has more knowledge than the common person. Right. So if you went back and got your PhD, yes, you were an expert. Right. But those aren't always the people that resonate the best on podcasts, right? It could be that person that's got 20 years experience. Well, that's expertise, but
Mhm.
often the best experts on podcasts are those people that are, two or three steps ahead of you because they can relate to you. They can share
Mhm.
their experience. As somebody pointed out to me, you know, if you are in fourth grade and have mastered fourth grade math, you're an expert in the eyes of the person trying to figure out second grade math. So look at that. No matter what we do, we have expertise that we can share. And, I'm a big believer we're blessed to be a blessing. And so when we've learned these lessons, well, we've earned all of these lessons, we should share those with other people too. And I think, if you're a coach, all of the things that you've learned the hard way, you're sharing with your clients, and it's the same way you can share those on podcast interviews.
Oh, so a couple things have bubbled up for me. Let's start with the concept of repurposing. I think that is gold, and often overlooked. So when you give advice about how to repurpose content, what comes up for you as key things?
Right now, what's working very, very well is video, right? People like faces. So take that short video, and my team jokes if I talk for 45 minutes, they can find 45 seconds of brilliance. So you take that little clip, and someone may not listen to the entire podcast, but they'll listen to start short snippets. That's a great way. And
Mhm.
the other thing is, like, I've written a lot of blogs in my life. Every one of them felt like a homework assignment, but I can take that video, I can take the transcript, and I can have someone else or GPT clean that up into a blog. I could have it listen to that and give me ideas for different posts that I could write, different
Mhm.
LinkedIn. You can get a month's worth of content from a single interview. And the great part is it doesn't take you any more of your time, right? You can show up, be the performer, drop the mic afterwards, and then someone else can do all the rest of that. And that's one of the things I see, especially from hardworking coaches. They're like, I've got to do all of this. No, you've already
Mhm.
done it. You can just repurpose that. And I
Right.
honestly believe that we don't have a content creation problem, right? People say, well, I wish I could do as much content as Gary Vaynerchuk does or Tony Robbins. Well, you do. The only difference is they've got somebody following them around with a camera and then they slice it and dice it. So your
Right.
your calls, right? You've got to watch confidentiality, but if you get off a call and you think of something, you can record a quick video. You're on a podcast interview, you can get all of that. And it's
Mhm.
amazing how much content you can get from that. The other thing that I hear
Right.
people sometimes will say is that, well, it's not fair, right? I did this interview and it was a month ago. I want to go on to new stuff. It's like, well, not everyone has heard that interview, right?
Right.
Just because, a book was written last year doesn't mean it's applicable now. And I heard somebody say, well, repurposed content, shouldn't you always be making new stuff? And I heard somebody said this, Christianity, right, is 2,000 years of repurposed content. All the content was created millennium ago. People are just repurposing it, putting different commentary on it. And you know what?
Mhm.
Not everybody has heard that. So I'm sure not everybody has heard all of your content. So make sure you repurpose that.
Well, and I'm willing to bet that you have content in a file drawer, on your laptop, on your desktop. You've got content in files that you've forgotten about, that you can go through your archives and think, oh my gosh, I'm so brilliant. I forgot that I'd written this or that I had done this. And then feed it into a AI tool and ask, what are some key blog posts from this, or what are my top 10 points in this, and create content around each one of those. I love my Copilot that goes with one of my mini programs, that, I'll say, okay, suggest a title, suggest, 5 talking points from this. It's all content I put in there. It's just helping me get out of my head.
A decade ago, we used to hire college interns. We'd hire journalism interns and say, here's all the content, write us blogs, right? And they would do it. They would love it because that's what their major was in. Now,
Mhm.
a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to have to go into GPT and do all of that. Well, there are people that love to do that. So if you
Mhm.
just took all of your content and gave it to a freelancer and said, go through here, find the blogs, find the pearls, they would have so much fun with that. And they could use
And
the
you'll be
tools.
amazed. You'll be amazed at how smart you are. You'll be like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I had this gold just laying around that I hadn't even paid attention to.
And not only that, Meg, you can clean it up too, because as anybody's heard this, I say a lot of ums and you knows and right. Well,
Right.
right, right. And just filler words. And when they repurpose it, they take out all my filler words. And I'm like, wow, I sound good on that.
Wow, I didn't realize just how good I was. So, with that, we want to kind of come back to this concept of, um, can't be a success in a secret, don't want to live in obscurity. So, when we think about getting our talking points out there, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to give the audience a few tips of, like, is it good to have a couple go-to topics? Is it better to kind of, dance in the moment and respond to whatever people want you to do? I mean, what do you recommend? Because I also think it needs to be doable. It needs to become, otherwise I see too often that it's like, oh, I'm not ready to do that, or oh, that's scary. So how do we take the scary out?
Yes. And we call it a podcast interview. It's not an interview, right? It's a discussion. Meg and I would be having the same discussion if we were sitting down having a cup of coffee, right? It's just right now it's being recorded. So don't be intimidated by that. Stories always work, right? They worked for the cavemen, they work today. And that's one of the things that makes you sound human, right? Because right now people are looking at it, the search engines are looking at it, and their first thought is, oh, this is just AI generated, right? Oh, is this email AI generated? Is this voice? So if you can tell stories, that's the one thing that AI can't do. So just think through this, right? What are different stories that you can tell? And you don't have to put people's names on this. You can always say, I worked with this client and this is the struggle they had, right? Because
Mhm.
people will resonate with this. This is how we worked together. This is what it looked like at the end. Most people will stop there. Always wrap it up in a moral, right? Remember Aesop's fables, all the rest of
Yes.
that. We'd get to the end. And the moral of the story is you don't have to live with this, that there are ways on this. You don't have to wait too long on this. So that really makes it actionable because people will start to think of that and relate to it, right? So
Mhm.
the other thing is content is king, context is God. So when you tell stories, make sure that it resonates with the people, right? So when I'm telling stories here, I'm talking about a coach we worked with, right? He joked he was in the witness protection plan, right? His name was the same as an NFL star, and his business name was the same as like a 1990s movie. And so he's like, nobody can find me on the internet. And I'm like, well, you can change your name or you can change your company name. And he's like, well, I don't want to do either of that. I'm like, then we've got to go out there and get you heard, get you known. So he started to go on podcasts. He started to get known. He started to get backlinks. He started to get mentioned on social media. He got clients from it. Then he got so many clients that he had to start mastermind groups because he didn't want to say no to all of these people. Then somebody heard him and he got a book deal. And so the exposure brought opportunity. And none of that would have happened if he hadn't have started to get out there. Right. So that's sort of the moral of the story. The best time to plant a tree was 40 years ago. The second best time is today. And you know what? His first interview, was it rough? Oh yeah. I'm sure it was probably the worst interview he did. But the first time we
But
ever
he did it.
coached
Yeah.
somebody, it was probably the worst coaching session we had, but we learned
Right.
from it. We went on, and people don't judge you by your first one. They judge you by your last one. And so they're always going to be hearing. And, that exposure brought opportunity. And now the NFL player retired and the 90s movie has sort of faded away. And so if you Google him or if you Google his company, it comes up on the first page. And more than important than that is when you start asking ChatGPT about business coaches that focus on entrepreneurs, um, family men, men of faith. His name comes up there. And so none of that would have happened if he hadn't taken that first step to get out on a podcast interview.
Love that. And, I say to coaches as I train them, I don't know of anybody who's died from bad coaching. And I don't know anybody who's died from a bad interview. It's still an interview. And we're always harder on ourselves um, than the people listening. If you're giving something of value, if you're giving people something to think about, it's a success.
It is. And
Uh,
often you can't say enough of the right things to the wrong people. So if someone doesn't like the way I drop my G's on words because I grew up in Chicago, well, I'm sorry, that's who I am. I'm not going to change after this long. If that bothers you, then we probably shouldn't work together, right? I always say on a podcast interview, people should turn you up or turn you off. Either one is fine. Because I think today I hear too many people saying, oh, we need to get more leads. We need to get more leads. Leads are like Facebook likes now. What does they mean, right? Nobody wants just more leads. They want more clients, and they want clients that they love to work with, that they bring value to. And when that happens, guess what? They're also very profitable. because they stay with you, they energize you, they bring new clients. So let's start focusing on profits, not on leads. So the better the marketing, the easier the sales. So have that discussion early on. Let people know, hey, Meg is the person for me, or she's not. Either way is fine. Let's figure that out ahead of time.
Love that. Okay, so we're unfortunately already running out of time. My question for you is, what is one thing that you would challenge the audience to do beginning in over this next week that might begin to get them some traction towards what we were talking about?
Identify 5 podcasts that have your ideal listeners on it. And people will say, oh, I'm going to start with my dream 100. No, just 5, right? Listen to those 5. Reach out to the host, give them a rating and review, share their content there. You know, Gary Vaynerchuk talks about jab, 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 right hook. Well, give, ask, right? So listen to their episodes, give them a rating and review, follow them on social media, then reach out to them and say, you know, Meg, I've listened to the podcast. I really liked this. I think I could add this value. Guess what? Give. They will be asking you to be on the show, even if it's a small show that's just starting out. And podcast hosts, no podcast hosts. So say out of those 5, you get on 2. Do a good job, right? Show up on time, be a gracious guest, add value. And podcast hosts now podcast hosts. So if those 2 interviews introduce you to 2 other podcast hosts and so on, your card's going to be filled. So that's what I would suggest. Start with 5, and in the next week to 2 weeks, you should be able to work your way onto those shows.
Love that. If people want to know more about you and the work that you do, what's the best way for them to connect?
Yeah. So you can go to Interview Valet with a v.com/star. Easy to remember. And there's an assessment there. 10 questions. Will podcast interview marketing work for you as a coach? I wrote a book. It's called Podcast Guest Profits: How to Grow Your Business with the Targeted Interview Strategy. You can buy it on Amazon, but if you go there, I'll mail you a free copy if you're in the States. If you're overseas, I'll email you a copy. And then finally, I'll put my calendar scheduling link on there. If you'd like to talk about this, my social media will be there. Um, we love working with coaches because you change people's lives and people need to hear you. So all of that is over there at interviewvalet.com/star.
So good. Tom, thank you for bringing your expertise, for us being able to share our passion to get coaches' work into the world. I want to thank all of you for listening again to the Star Coach Show, where every week we explore strategies, tools, and resources to help you build your skills, build your business, change the world with your coaching. Remember that we're all here in this big world doing it together. So let's do the lifting together. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and we'll see you next week. Thanks again, Tom.